feeling, right? The one when something just isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I had that feeling right before everything went wrong. It was just another lockdown drill at my high school in Pennsylvania. Routine, boring even. Teachers locking doors, students huddling in silence, the kind of thing that's supposed to make you feel safe. But that day, it didn't. We were in the music room. A group of us had gathered there, sitting on the floor, nervously checking our phones as we waited for the drill to end. That's when we first heard it. At first it was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was a piano. The faintest melody played, just a few notes, but enough to make everyone pause and look at each other. The thing is, there was no one at the piano. We all looked around, confused. It wasn't anyone in the room. The sound grew louder. The notes began to fill the space, each one more clear than the last. And still, no one was near the piano. My heart was racing now, and I wasn't the only one feeling it. One of my friends, Emily, looked pale. She pointed to the piano. "It's moving," she whispered. I turned to look, and sure enough, the piano lid was open. It hadn't been before. We were sure of it. We were all certain. But somehow, it was open now. And the music? It kept playing, louder, like someone was really trying to get our attention. Just as the drill ended and teachers began checking the rooms, something else happened. We all saw it. Shadowy figures, barely there, hovering around the piano. Not people, not students, just shapes that moved like smoke. Some of us screamed, others froze. The teacher, Mrs. Daniels, came in, shaking her head, trying to calm us down. But she looked at the piano, her face draining of color. The next day, rumors began to spread. People were talking about the music teacher, Mr. Rhodes, who had passed away decades ago. Heart attack, they said, right there in that same room. He had been known for his love of music, and apparently for his ghost. The rumors said that sometimes, when the room was empty and quiet, Mr. Rhodes would play the piano. And I guess that day, he felt like playing. I thought I'd heard it all. You know, those typical ghost stories that people tell to spook each other. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened at my middle school in Texas. It wasn't a drill. This time, there was a real reason for the lockdown. A report of a potential intruder. So, we all sat in silence, trying to ignore the fear crawling up our spines. Teachers locked the doors, students gathered in corners, and we waited. But then, it started. The footsteps, heavy, slow. They echoed down the hallway outside our classroom, one after another. It wasn't a student. It wasn't the police, because we hadn't heard anything over the intercom. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't the only one. A few of us whispered, wondering if anyone else was hearing it. One teacher, Mrs. Turner, did what we all wanted to do. She peeked through the small window in the door. Her face went white. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. We could all see it. A shadow, pacing back and forth outside. It didn't stop. Step after step, as if the person was waiting. Waiting for what? The weird part? The motion detectors never picked up anything. No blips, no signs of movement. Nothing. And that figure? It didn't trigger any alarm. We waited for what felt like hours. When the police cleared the building, they found no sign of an intruder. No one in the hallway. But as we all whispered to each other later, a chilling story came out. In the 1980s, a janitor had died tragically in the school. Some said it was an accident, others claimed it was suicide. but no one ever saw him leave. It was said that he used to patrol the hallways every night. And now, every time there was a lockdown, some people claimed they heard those same heavy footsteps. And I know, deep down, that the figure we saw that day was him. I'll never forget that day. A normal lockdown drill, or so I thought. But it happened at an old elementary school in the Midwest, one with a history, a dark history. I was a kindergarten teacher. Small kids, big hearts, and lots of noise. But on that day, it was eerily quiet, until I heard it. A sob. Faint at first, just a soft, shuddering sound coming from the hallway outside my classroom. It made my skin crawl. I figured it was one of my kids, scared, maybe crying for the parents. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. No child, just emptiness. I chalked it up to nerves, a little paranoia in the air. But when I mentioned it to a colleague after the drill, her face drained of color. She told me that she and several other teachers had heard the same thing. The crying. It wasn't a student. It wasn't anyone in the building. It was something else. The school had been built on the site of a former orphanage, one that had burned down years ago. And as the story went, a child had died there. A child who was never claimed, never found. They said their soul had never left. Every time there was a lockdown, the cries would return. Faint, desperate sobs that echoed through the empty hallways, as though the child was still waiting. I've never felt the same since that day. And every time there's a lockdown, I hear the cries again, even though I know no one is there. It was supposed to be a routine lockdown. An emergency alarm malfunction, they said. Nothing serious, just another drill. But for me, it would become a nightmare I couldn't escape. We were in the library, a group of us, sitting quietly, waiting for the drill to end. It was strange. You know that feeling when the air is too still, when something feels wrong but you can't quite explain it. That was the atmosphere that day. It wasn't long before I noticed him. At first it was just a glimpse. An older man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He was walking between the shelves as if looking for something. But there was no sound, no footsteps, just the slow swish of his coat as he moved. He didn't belong there. None of us said anything at first, not wanting to sound crazy, but we were all thinking it. I tried to ignore him, but he was still there, walking in and out of view. His face was blurred, like I couldn't focus on it, no matter how hard I tried. It was almost like he was fading in and out of existence. That's when the librarian, Mrs. Martin, noticed too. She stood up, walked over to check the aisles, but when she turned the corner, she came back looking pale. "There's no one here," she said, almost in disbelief. "It's just us." But when we checked the security footage later, there it was. A misty figure moving through the aisles of books. It wasn't just a reflection or a glitch, it was a person. Or at least, it looked like one. Historians later confirmed something even more chilling. The school had been built on the grounds of an old manor house, and the figure we saw? It was believed to be the ghost of the former librarian who had worked in the manor's private library, the same one where he had spent years before his death. And now, apparently, he was still doing his rounds. Have you ever been in a room where something just doesn't add up? Where you know something's wrong, but no one believes you? That's exactly what happened to me in Ohio. It was a typical day, a small town high school. Nothing unusual. That is, until the lockdown. A suspicious noise, they said. A drill gone wrong. We were instructed to stay put, stay quiet. I remember sitting in the classroom with my classmates, trying to keep calm, trying not to look out the window. That's when the substitute teacher walked toward the door. She had been with us all day, but something about her felt off. She paused at the door, listening for something outside. Then, she didn't come back. Minutes passed. An hour. We waited, but the teacher didn't return. At first, we thought maybe she was just checking with someone, maybe the hallways were being cleared. But as time went on, we started to grow anxious. There was something strange about the whole thing. Our eyes kept glancing at the clock. Why hadn't she come back? When the lockdown ended, we rushed to report the incident to tell someone. But when we asked, the school administration just looked at us like we were crazy. There was no substitute teacher assigned to your room today, they said. What do you mean, no teacher? She had been with us for hours. She was real. She was there. But when we reviewed the security footage, the camera showed nothing. No teacher. Just us. Sitting alone in the classroom the entire time. They never did explain what happened that day. But the rumors started to spread. The school had been built on land that was rumored to be cursed, and one story stuck with me. The story of a teacher who had vanished mysteriously in the 1970s. Some said she had been involved in something dark. Others said she had been taken. All I know is the teacher that day. I don't think she was the same as the one who had walked into the room. This one still haunts me. It was gym class of all places. We were stuck in the middle of a lockdown drill, shoved into a storage room behind the bleachers. We thought it was no big deal. It was supposed to be temporary, just a little waiting game. But it felt wrong. You know that feeling, right? When the silence gets too loud? At first we were just talking, trying to keep our nerves in check. But then, one of my friends, Alex, looked up and froze. She motioned for the rest of us to be quiet. In the far corner of the gym, we all saw it. A tall shadow. At first we thought it was a teacher or maybe an administrator, someone who had come in to check on us. But this figure wasn't moving like a person. It didn't make a sound. It just glided across the gym floor without even a squeak on the hardwood. We stayed frozen, watching it. I could feel my heart racing, pounding in my chest. The shadow moved closer, but no footsteps, no noises. It was like it wasn't even touching the floor. Finally, the drill ended, and we rushed out of the storage room, trying to shake off what we'd seen. But when we spoke to the gym teacher, she said there was no one else in the gym but us. She was certain. That's when I heard the story. The gym, the court we'd been standing on. A former coach had died there decades ago. A heart attack, they said, while he was coaching the team. They said he still watched over the gym, keeping an eye on the players. And every so often, especially during quiet moments like lockdowns, he would show up. But I don't think it was him. I don't think it was just a coach. That shadow, it was something else. Have you ever been trapped somewhere where the only thing keeping you safe is a locked door? And then, out of nowhere, it starts to rattle? That was the moment I realized that something wasn't right. Not just with the lockdown we were having in that school in New Mexico, but with the building itself. It started like any other drill. The alarms went off. We all filed into the classroom, and the teacher locked the door behind us. We sat in complete silence, listening to the muffled sounds of footsteps echoing down the hall. But then, about halfway through the drill, I heard it. The door handle started shaking. At first it was soft, like someone was trying to get in, but he was just a little too gentle. I thought it was just a student trying to play a prank. But then it got violent. The rattling grew louder, and the door seemed to tremble with every forceful tug. My heart started racing. I glanced around at the other students, their faces pale, some of them gripping their chairs like they were about to be dragged into the dark. The teacher's hand was on the phone, calling the main office. But here's the thing. When the administrators checked the hallway on the security cameras, there was nobody there. The door kept shaking, but there was no one to be seen. When the lockdown finally ended, the teachers rushed to check the door, and that's when they found it. The door had opened on its own, completely unlocked. It wasn't just a one-time thing either. Later, a custodian admitted to us that the same door had mysteriously unlocked during previous incidents years before. He didn't say much, but the look on his face said everything. They believed it was the work of a spirit, the spirit of a former student, someone who had passed away years ago in the building. And apparently, he didn't like being locked out. Have you ever heard something from above? Something that wasn't supposed to be there? It was a lockdown drill in an elementary school in Oregon. But I wasn't thinking about the drill. I was thinking about the noise. It started soft, just a faint tapping above us. At first, I thought it was part of the drill, some sort of sound effects to make it feel more real. But then, it changed. The knocking turned into thudding, heavy footsteps pacing, as if someone were walking right above the classroom. We all froze. It was too loud to be anything normal, too rhythmic, too human. I wasn't the only one who noticed it. A few of my classmates looked up at the ceiling, eyes wide with fear. But none of us dared to speak. It felt like if we said something, the thing above us might hear us. When the lockdown ended, the teachers rushed to check the area. They inspected the ceiling, the walls. There was no one there. The thudding had stopped the second the lockdown ended. But then, the teachers shared something with us that I couldn't shake. The school had been rebuilt after a fire years ago. And it wasn't just any fire. It had taken lives. One of the victims, a student, who had been trapped in the building when it burned down. And now, well, the rumor was that they hadn't left. I don't know what we heard that day, but I know it wasn't someone fixing pipes or working above us. Whatever it was something else. Some places are just wrong. You ever walk into a room and feel that? Like something's watching you, waiting for you to leave? That's how the bathroom felt during the lockdown at my middle school in Illinois. It was supposed to be a safe place to hide, but it wasn't. Not anymore. There were about 5 of us in there, all huddled in the corner. We were trying to be quiet, trying not to make a sound. But that's when it started. The whispers. At first, we thought it was just one of the others trying to prank us. But then it got louder, clearer. One voice in particular, soft and faint at first, was calling my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. No one. The whispers got worse. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was multiple voices all speaking over each other, saying things I couldn't make out. I remember one of the other students, Emily, clutching her head. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I can't take it." The teacher came to check on us after the lockdown ended. She opened the bathroom door and looked around. There was nothing unusual. No one there. But then she told us something that made my skin crawl. The bathroom, she said, had a history. It was one of the oldest parts of the school, and over the years, students had reported strange occurrences, things moving on their own, voices, even objects disappearing. Some of the staff even avoided using that bathroom, especially at night, because, well, they said it was haunted by someone who never left. And when I walked out of there, I didn't feel any safer. I felt like I had just left something behind, something that was now following me. Lockers, you wouldn't think anything creepy about them, would you? But I'll never look at one the same way again. It was just another lockdown drill at my high school in California. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Except for the screams. They came from down the hall. At first, I thought it was just someone messing around, but then I heard it more clearly. Muffled screams, panic, desperation. I froze, staring down the empty hallway. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Several students looked around, trying to find where the sound was coming from. The screams were coming from a locker. We called security, but when they checked, they found nothing. No one was inside the locker. It was empty. But the staff, long-time staff, the kind that had been there for decades, knew exactly what was happening. They told us the story of a student who had been accidentally locked inside a locker decades ago in the 1960s. They didn't find him in time. He suffocated, trapped in the dark. And now, sometimes, when the school was empty and the halls were quiet, you could still hear him, screaming. I don't know what it was that day, but I know it wasn't just a sound. It was his voice, calling out to be found.